If the people of a country are to be kept informed about government's policies and programs, then an agency must exist to ensure that this occurs. One such agency charged with this remit is the Barbados Government Information Service. The 1950s saw Barbados still under colonial rule, but there were increasing calls for independence, with Sir Grantley Adams elected Prime Minister of the West Indies Federation and Premier of Barbados. By the late 1950s, unemployment had exceeded 20%, and there were calls for better wages for sugar workers. It was against this climate that the Government Information Service came into being in 1958.
I think it is important to note that GIS, when it was established, was really a colonial creature because it was established before Barbados became an independent nation, established in 1958. So it was a spin-off, as it were, of the British Information Service. Britain was a sovereign country. That created certain problems because GIS was, in its early years, not well treated either by government officials or by the media, because it was a hybrid of some kind. It was seen as part government agency and part media house. So government officials tended to be wary of a media operation, and the grounded, more experienced members of in the media houses tended to regard GIS as just a tool of the government.
Any agency that has as its purview the dissemination of information must navigate how best to articulate government's policies with the utmost accuracy and integrity, and to create change while satisfying a skeptical public. The Barbados Government Information Service was first headed by career diplomat Oliver Jackman from 1958 to 1959. He was given the title of Information Officer, but it was Gladstone Holder who became the country's first Chief Information Officer. An English teacher and later a journalist, his indelible stamp for excellence was firmly planted on the department under his direction over 17 years from 1959 until 1976. Efforts were on press releases, still photography, the film unit, and radio in those early years.
We had a small staff. We used to use the gas techno machine to produce press releases and our booklets. It was a small, tight group. All of us fitted into the first floor where your photography department now is. The whole staff fitted into that, and the section where they store the tapes, those two sections on that floor. And we had a very tight team. We used to produce 3 and 4 features on Sunday for Albert Rice.
But the thing about Gladstone, he didn't micromanage us, right? Once you got on with the job, he left you to get on with it. And well, if there's anything that he disagreed with, obviously as the chief he would think, but he didn't micromanage us. I accepted that he had people who knew what they were about, they were talented, so he let them get on with it. If there was a problem, then he would say something. But he, as I say, he did some of the programs. He did some of the programs himself. I guess you might recall the theme in those days, sugar cane. Da 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 dee da 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 da. Cut the sugar cane to the bunny. Planted sugar cane, came for big and tall, from the bright sun and dripping rain, the money for one and all. Cut the sugar cane till the bunny.
Trying to satisfy such a diverse audience came with challenges. In the beginning, staff members were recruited from other ministries, and the organization faced many challenges as far as getting information was concerned.
I know when I joined the GIS, for example, that there were several senior government officers who would not give us information. Definitely not give us information. We had to borrow information from all kinds of places. There was a case I remember in particular when there was an outbreak of leptospirosis at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The Ministry of Health didn't want to give us any information. I went into the hospital and spoke to several people that I knew and got numbers of cases which were being withheld by the ministry. We published the information. I was banned from the Ministry of Health for a while for that. So that's the kind of climate we had. But it was interesting. And as I said, thanks to Mr. Holder's integrity and his professional courage, we made it through.
The department had to find varying ways to get its messages across, and community radio was an important instrument.
The following is an address given by the Prime Minister of Barbados and Minister responsible for aviation.
With the passage of time, the department had to come up with more innovative ways to reach its audience.
The Ministry of Health and the Environment continues its fogging program.
It's a matter of interest.
It was very exciting, to be quite honest, very exciting in those days, although a little stressful because we had to do 4 half-hour programs a week, 2 radio and 2 television, and we didn't have a studio. I think we had a little radio thing. We had Mr. Kamabach. He was a technician and he operated the little studio that we had, but it was nothing much really to think about. So we had to use CBC and I think Radio Fusion extensively. CBC afforded us 2 afternoons per week to record our programs, and VOB gave us some time. I can't remember how much time they gave us a week, but so you can see how difficult it was to do 4 half-hour programs per week, and there were just 3 of us on in television, radio and television at the time. With John Manning, who was the information officer in charge of television, Andrea Golp, and myself.
Mr. Holder was succeeded by renowned photographer Gordon Roach from 1976 to 1978.
The island's fishing industry is another intriguing subject for study. An average of 10 million pounds of fish is caught yearly. 60% of that figure is made up of flying fish, so it's not altogether surprising that Barbados is picturesquely called the land of the flying fish.
When Mr. Roach demitted office, Carl Ince took up the leadership of the organization until 1981.
I had 2, as I said, I had 2 periods. The first period, the office concentrated almost exclusively on filming, and this because the people who were officials, the leader, were primarily people who came from a background of filming in government. And so they came almost as an adjunct of the Ministry of Education. And such people were not especially interested in the broader aspect of government's work.
He brought his own inimitable style to the business of public information.
I made the point of having weekly meetings and so on, and you arrived at your topics. It was different from now because I don't know how you found your early days, but there was a time when we concentrated on general things. You would have health today, and next week is probably education. And on the whole, the topics tended not to be narrowly political. I would think, if I look about my years there, on as head and also as member of staff, a lot of this depended more on who the minister was than on the staff.
A typical meal may consist of 1 serving of rice, a slice of sweet potato, beans, carrots or tomatoes, cabbages, lettuce, a mixture of beef and pork stew, and, of course, fruit.
Mr. Ince was followed by writer Anthony Cave, who became Chief Information Officer from 1982 to 1984.
I think the GIS has a fundamental operating philosophy. And that is just what I alluded to. And that philosophy to me is to facilitate and to maintain at all time, under all conditions, a reliable and a responsive channel, and a mutual channel, I should say, a reliable and a responsive channel of information between those whose responsibility it is to make sovereign decisions and those for whom those decisions are made.
I would like to see
Writer Margaret Hope assumed the reins of the organization from 1985 until 2003, becoming not only the first female head, but eclipsing Gladstone Holder as the longest-serving Chief Information Officer.
I was the first public relations officer assigned to a ministry. Officers were assigned to ministries from Gladstone's period. I was the first. To the Ministry of Trade. I used to do Consumer Diary, which was a report on the cost prices of food in the supermarkets compared with the BMC, so people could get an idea of what was being sold at too expensive a price or not. We interviewed people. At that time, a lot of visiting poets and writers came through Barbados University. We were very close. I was very close to people at the university, and we did radio interviews with poets, George Lamin and Eddie Braffett and all Kamau, as he's called, and all the people who came through. But in terms of remit, I don't think it has changed. The technology has changed the way we do business. But to me, the remit of GIS remains the same, which is to liaise between government, the press, and the population as they educate and inform the public.
In those early days, television was still a luxury for many, and the agency had to find ways to reach its audience, and it hit pay dirt with the mobile cinema.
From the time I could remember living in the country, because of course I came from St. Thomas, the mobile cinema was part of my social diary. When you hear the mobile cinema coming, that was a big thing. And not only of the documentaries, but the documentaries were very much sweetened with the buttonloos, which you look forward to.
Now, if you're not in Chicago, and you're not in St. Louis, and you're not in Philadelphia, then you must be someplace else.
That's right.
And if you're someplace else, you're not here.
Yes. That's right.
Hey, give me back my money.
Who took your money?
That's my money.
Who took your money?
You did. That's.
I took your money?
That's right.
Now, just a minute, big boy.
Yeah.
Didn't you say that I wasn't in Chicago?
That's right.
That I wasn't in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
And that I wasn't in St. Louis?
That's right.
Well, if I'm not in Chicago, St. Louis, or Philadelphia, I must be someplace else.
That's right.
Well, if I'm someplace else, I couldn't be here. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Well, if I'm not here, how could I take your money?
Well, we used to have schedules to work on the mobile cinema. We went out, sat up with the driver and the officer was set up, had the driver set up for the show. The crowd would come. the officer would introduce the series of films. The crowd will watch, and we will end with Bud and Lou. But we will end with Bud and Lou, which brought down the house. And then the crowd would disperse, and we went home 1 and 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. Just the officer and the driver.
I enjoyed the mobile cinema. I enjoyed contributing where that was concerned, because growing up, I knew how people used to look forward to it. You know, when I was growing up, when the mobile cinema was coming to St. Barnabas, for instance, the priests would announce weeks beforehand the mobile cinema is coming. The headmaster of the school would announce in the school the mobile cinema is coming in a few weeks, and you'd be looking forward to it. So any time it came, the church pastor was full of people, you know. So I knew how important it was to the people then, because there was no television at the time. So the only time that they would have been seeing themselves would be on the mobile cinema.
The Queen knights him with a sword.
The Barbados Government Information Service must also assist with media relations and coordination, especially for state events at Government House and major visits of international figures.
Frankly, there were so many memorable things about GIS. Working with the prime ministers and the government ministers, organizing visits like President Clinton and President Reagan, Fidel Castro, working with the press with Comrade Fidel Castro. We had visits from presidents of Africa, from Latin America, from the Caribbean, traveling with the prime ministers to overseas conferences, meeting new people and hearing the debates of key issues in the world at that time.
The BGIS also produces publications under its archival section that chronicle major events in this island's history. The department's production section has captured images of important events. The Barbados Government Information Service is there, especially in times of crisis, informing the nation and working with the media. As the years tick by, the department developed its broadcasting component, with video now replacing film. Programs had to be recorded at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, the island's lone TV station.
We got 2 afternoons per week to record our programs at CBC. And in those days, you had to direct your own programs at CBC. They would give you the studio crew, stage manager, and the switcher. The switcher was there to switch from one camera to the other. And you would sit, both of you would sit up in the gallery, and you would tell them, well, give me camera 1, give me a cover shot. And you had to do the directing yourself. They didn't direct for you. And I remember my first trip to CBC was really a baptism of fire, because the information officer took me up there, introduced me to the floor manager and the crew on the floor, and to the switcher. And then I looked around twice, and he was gone.
Eventually, film became a relic and was replaced with video.
But at that time, we had switched to 5 programs a week, 5 television programs a week, two 15-minute and 3 5s. But we also had a radio. I think we had a radio section. So the television section, we could concentrate on television, and we had a radio section that concentrated on radio. So that helped. And the film section was phased out at that point when video came.
It was always a challenge to source content.
One popular program that we had was health has always been a very important area in our programming. And people generally watched, listened, read everything that we produced concerning public health. We always had a ready cadre of nurses, doctors who were willing to come on the air to explain. We had a clinic on the air. There's a program we had called Clinic, I remember, that was very popular. In which people were given lots of free advice by nurses and doctors and other medical personnel.
Explain what this
Another signature program for the department was Telling the Nation, where government ministers came on air to explain policies.
That was extremely popular. There were several other programs we did on schools. Anything involving school children was always very popular. We tried, let me say, to establish what I like to call a reliable mutual channel for people at all levels in the society to be able to say something to government and not have government do all the talking. That was our approach, to make sure that the government heard from the people it was responsible for, and the people heard from the government that they had elected.
Its multi-skilled information officers are assigned to the various government ministries and have to conceptualize and implement public relations proposals to reach a cross-section of persons.
Good evening, and welcome to On Camera, the Barbados Government Information Service's monthly review program.
It was now the 80s, and the Barbados Government Information Service was now on the cusp of transition. The mobile cinema was now a relic of the past, and the BGIS had to adapt to the changing dynamic.
By the 80s, the information environment was changing because technology was altering in a way that I think in our lifetime had never been altered before. And I remember once then Prime Minister Bernard St. John calling me into his office, and he showed me an article, which I still have a copy of the article, and it talked about information communication technology and telecommunications. And he said, listen, you see this? This is what you should get into. I hear you say you want to study more. You do this, because this is where that broadcasting going. And he was right. And I did it because I then saw that GIS was going to be very much a part of that future that he pointed out to me. And I still have the article. As a matter of fact, I saw it the other day, and it's all crinkling now and stuff. I said, I remember this was what set me on a course with a whole new perspective on what a government information service should be like.
There were many memorable occasions.
We met Her Majesty the Queen. I remember we had journalist Alfred Pagnell, who just loved Her Majesty. And as a matter of fact, every morning he would call, have they told you what Her Majesty is wearing? And you know, so we were told that when you go to actually meet Her Majesty, one thing is that men tip their heads and women do a little curtsy. And at the point, Alfred so loved Her Majesty, he went all the way down, right? And she just saw her step back. But then I think her security people realized that it wasn't anything, it was just Alfred being Alfred.
Such an environment often lends itself to a potpourri of colorful and enigmatic characters.
Our remit was wide, our duties were varied, and there was never a day, I think, that you went 2 days the same. Because of course, we're working in a place of creative people. For me, I thought that that was one of the places where a lot of creative people were all concentrated in one place. But of course, you know, that comes with its own issues because everybody is a diva. Everybody, and it produces a lot of characters. And we were wonderful. We were all very eccentric. But who wants to be like everybody else?
Being the link between government and the public had its share of challenges, but the real test came with trying to navigate the political waters with the change of administrations.
With change of government, there was also a matter of gaining the trust of the new administration. They had seen you work closely with the previous administration in Parliament and everywhere, and they were usually very distrustful at first, and you had to literally persuade them by your own work and your fairness of comment that you were as dedicated to them as you were to the previous administration, which I think I did successfully as chief, and the staff supported that.
The public has a right to be informed and educated about some of the issues and policies that are synonymous with governance, and the BGIS will be there to fill this role.
I think that GIS itself makes its relevance noted by the general public. And I say that because the whole information communication environment is such that it means that each day GIS, like everybody else, has to be re-engineering itself to be so that it is heard amongst all of the other noises that are there. And it has a role, yes, it will continue to have a role, because as long as there's government and there's people, once you can't bring everybody under a tree and tell them what the government is trying to do on their behalf, and for government to find out what concerns they have, there will always be a role. But it's how it exercises that role and how it keeps itself current in the communication in the communication environment. And I'm very pleased to see that GIS has put a lot of emphasis on its social media platform, because that is really where part of its future will lie.
The role of the Barbados Government Information Service will remain the subject of debate for years to come. But whatever the future, the organization remains committed to providing information that is relevant and timely as it continues to chronicle this nation's development.